Hello and welcome everybody. This week I'll be looking at a couple games I played against some young talents we have here at the Chess Center. So we have several kids playing here who are nationally ranked, and this week I played the two highest rated of them, both of whom are over 2000. So I guess the theme of this video is opening disasters. Actually, both of my opponents are pretty talented and they can occasionally give me some trouble, but in these two games they either didn't know the opening quite so well, or they just had a bad opening choice. Or either way, they didn't get out of the opening with a good position. So that can kind of really have a big impact on the rest of the game if you don't really get out of the opening with a good position that you feel comfortable with. Then oftentimes, even if it's a playable position, if you're not comfortable with it, that alone can just lead to mistakes later. So, okay, let's just go into the first game. So first game I was white, and I played e4, and we played Vienna. So the Vienna is sometimes an opening that I play just to kind of mix things up, and it's not the most common opening system after e4, e5 for white, and sometimes people don't really know what to do against it. Actually, here my opponent already, after f4, played he deviated from the main line. So really the only move that is like acceptable for black here, well, the only move that's really played by GMs, let's say, is d5. Because you kind of have to be active, and it's kind of similar to a King's Gambit where black is playing this kind of Falkbeer counter gambit style, except here it's not really a counter gambit because if white takes here, you can just take on e4. And there's some theory here. I mean, white can play some moves, like white can play knight f3, queen f3 is also a move, and I think d3 is also a move. So I don't really know a lot of theory from this position. I don't know what I would have played, probably knight f3 or queen f3. But either way, this is the way black should play. And even if you don't know a whole lot of the theory here, I mean, I don't either, so if we'll probably get to like move 10, and we'll both be playing on our own. But at least here, you can develop your pieces pretty easily. Both your bishops can come out. You're not really going to have any problem controlling the center. So this is the way that black should play. Instead, my opponent played d6, which, it's not a terrible move, but it basically turns this into a King's Gambit, where now black is playing with a passive dark square bishop. So usually when people play a King's Gambit and they don't accept the pawn, this bishop ends up on c5. And this is a very good, way to play for black, where you just stay solid in the center and this bishop is active. But this way now, okay, I play knight f3, knight c6, and yeah, basically it's a King's Gambit where white is not taking any risk. Because if you ever take on f4, then I'll play d4, I'll win this pawn back pretty quickly. And we had some normal moves here, so I played bishop c4. I didn't really know anything about this d6 line, so bishop c4 actually turns out is not the most accurate move. The recommended approach for white is actually bishop b5, and I think the reason is bishop c4, it's possible maybe for black to get away with this move, which was something I looked at, but I didn't really feel like this was even playable for black. But it turns out it's not so simple. I mean, I think I was going to just castle, and this is a typical way for black to play sometimes, to just take and play f6. And I mean, this position is kind of unclear. I mean, white definitely has compensation for the pawn, probably full compensation. But on the other hand, black is very solid, and it's not clear how I'm going to break through. Okay, anyway, that would have been quite interesting. But instead, my opponent played h6. I mean, this is also kind of moves like this, h6, are not really, like, I would not be happy to play moves like h6, even if I had to. But, okay. Clearly not, doesn't want to run knight g5. So, okay, I mean, I just continue normally. d3. Now, okay, I'm just making sure my pawn is defended. And bishop e7, I play a3. So, just making sure that there's no knight a5. My bishop has a retreat square on a2. And, okay, so we got bishop g4. I played h3. And takes, knight d4, queen f2. And, I mean, this position is, it's between, I would say, a slight advantage and clear advantage for white. I have the two bishops, and black did get a little bit of activity, and I have weakened myself a little bit on the king side. So actually some idea that black may be able to use at some point is knight h5, trying to get bishop h4 in and really attack my dark squares. You can't play knight h5 right away, actually, because there's a nice tactical shot here. So if you want to pause and try and see what the winning move is for white, I'll give you a chance to do that. So this is kind of a classic opening tactic. It's just bishop takes f7. You have to take it, and then I take on e5 with check. I remove the defender of your knight, and I just take that next move. So again, this would not be good for black. So I actually thought instead he would just castle here. I mean, I thought this was pretty reasonable. And actually, like I may have to be a little bit careful here because bishop e3 is the automatic move here. But now after knight h5, I actually wasn't so sure about this position. Because black wants to play bishop h4 and then knight g3. So like, for example, if I just castle and we get a position like this, you play bishop h4, I have to go to d2. And then you play knight g3. My rook moves, let's say I go to e1 or d1. I mean, this position, I wasn't totally sure if I'm so happy here, because it's kind of difficult for me to get rid of these active pieces. And, I can always start some kind of attack with f5. That's the thematic way to continue here. But, yeah, with my dark squares being this weak, I'm not actually sure that that's the move I want to play here. Something like f5. So, anyway, this would have been interesting. I wasn't sure how I would play that position. And also, actually, after castles, I maybe don't have to play bishop e3. I maybe also want to play like g3, which looks kind of artificial, but maybe it's playable here. But anyway, I was pretty happy to see my opponent's next move, queen d7, because that's just kind of, to me, not really threatening anything. So I don't know if b5 might be the idea. So I thought maybe he was going to try something like that. But I mean, even b5, I can just move my bishop back. So I play bishop e3, just continuing to develop. And now, yeah, it's difficult to suggest a good move for black because, I mean, you don't want to play c5 here because then I can take and play bishop b5 next move. I mean, the only other active move you could play is b5, but something like this, you will be sacrificing a pawn. I mean, I could take here, and then if you take my knight, or my bishop on c4, then I can take on e5. And even though you can take here, I mean, maybe I can castle here. I mean, I thought maybe black should try to go for something like this, because at least you open up some lines and you kind of throw some imbalance into the position. And at least your pieces will have some more scope. But instead he played knight c6, which I was also very happy to see. And now, okay, I just castle and I'm already thinking, like, white's position is clearly better. And this is getting to be pretty difficult for black to actually find good moves here, because if you castle kingside, I'm going to play f5 and start this big attack. So that will be very dangerous. You can't castle queenside for a number of reasons. I mean, a7 is hanging and f7 is hanging. Your pieces are kind of restricted. But if you don't castle, then I'm going to play d4 and break through in the center, which could be even worse than your other options. So yeah, this is already a very difficult position for black. And he played a6, which I actually thought he might play it because the idea is to do something active like b5 and then maybe b4. I mean, I played a3, which technically weakens my queenside a little bit, but it's just too slow. I played d4 already, and now I have some serious threats. So b5, now I can, at the very least, I can take on e5. This position is, I mean, this is just not playable. I take the bishop, I take here, I can play e5 again, and the opening up of the center is going to be bad news for black, with the king still on e8. So he took on d4. I took. And yeah, I mean, once again, it's kind of tough to find a good move. If you castle, then you may run into e5, so he didn't want to allow that. He played c5, which kicks my queen back, but after queen e3, then once again, you still have the same problem of e5, which you really can't stop. Even if you move the queen somewhere, I'll still play e5. And I don't know, this position may already be lost for black, I'll be honest, just because like if you castle, for example, I'll play e5, and then e6 next move is going to be material, so you can't do that. h7, e6, then I'll take on f7. That's bad. And yeah, otherwise, if you don't castle, castling queenside is not likely to be any better. It also hangs f7. So my opponent got out of the pin, he played queen c7. yeah, I think you could make an argument for queen c6. That's what we looked at after the game. But even here, e5 and knight d7, so you have one threat, bishop g5. But even if I just play like h4, this position is still very difficult. I mean, now if you castle, you always run into these e6 problems. So, not so easy. But after queen c7, now, okay, after e5 now, this is, now we can say it's clearly winning for white, because tactically you're just winning material. I mean, this knight only has so many squares to go to. This trick doesn't actually work to play bishop g5, because I can just take. And actually, I win a lot of material for the queen, but it's actually even worse than that, because I get the queen back anyway. But the knight has no other squares to go to, and knight d5 is also coming. So he tried knight d7, which I thought was the best move, and I'm sure bishop takes f7, or e6, or rook takes d7 works, so I calculated all those moves here. I mean, I even looked at a slow move like king b1 or something. Whoops, not queen g5. That would be quite a bad move. But, okay, knight d5 is probably the simplest, because this just forces the endgame pretty much. You have to take on e5, otherwise, I mean, I don't seriously believe queen d8 is really playable. I mean, I could take on e7, I could play knight f6 check, I have a lot of options. And this endgame is just going to be down in exchange, knight c7. And actually, really, you do have a pawn for the exchange, but it's not the fact that you're down in exchange that's the problem, it's the fact that your king and rook are out of play. That's the big problem. So this endgame, yeah, I mean, bishop f6, c3, b5, rook a7, and I was able to convert this pretty quickly. So a5, knight c7, threatening rook a8 check. So these two pieces are not enough to really create any threats against my king. Plays g6 to get his king a flight square. It is important not to make a blunder here, so like rook f1 would be a very unfortunate blunder, because actually black can win material back with bishop g5 check. And wherever the king goes is going to be a knight fork, either knight d2 or knight e3. So it's important not to fall into a trap like that. But instead I played rook e1, which just gets my last piece into play, and now I'm going to try and surround his king. So, yeah, after knight e5, and of course anything is good here, but I played rook f1. Now if the bishop moves, I'm going to try and attack on the f-file, attack this f7 pawn. And he resigned after the next move, just took on b5. So, I actually do want to point out that this whole time I could have always played rook a8 check to just trade material. I mean, when you have a winning, or when you're up in material, especially in the endgame, the general rule of thumb is you want to trade pieces, right? But it's not always true. I mean, the exception is if your opponent's king is weak, you almost never want to trade pieces, unless you're exchanging off really good defenders. So, like, I wouldn't mind trading the knight for this bishop, because this bishop is a really good defender. But I definitely don't want to trade anything for this rook, because that's just a passive piece. That doesn't really help defend anything. Okay, but anyway, yeah. So what happened this game was really my opponent just didn't seem very comfortable at the opening. And, you know, that's part of the appeal to playing like a system like the Vienna, is that it's not a super common opening. So if your opponent doesn't face it very often, then they may feel not very comfortable. I mean, I don't really play the Vienna very often either, but some of these positions that you can get, I guess you can argue they're easier for white to play, even in the main lines. I mean, I think there's, yeah, some of the lines that they're playing here, I don't know exactly what they are, but, you know, this pawn in e5, I can get some kind of pressure on the king side, some kind of attack on the open f-file, so maybe it's not so easy for black. But, yeah, if you take a look at most of these openings, like the King's Gambit and the Vienna, and, you know, like some other openings, like maybe the Scotch, that aren't really super common. They're not super commonly played at the GM level, and the reason is they don't really, they're not considered to give white any real advantage out of the opening. So that means that oftentimes black has a lot of simple ways to just play against it. So like against the Vienna, I mean, you can also play something simple like knight c6, and that just kind of play a symmetrical game. And f4 I don't think is as good here, because I think you can just take. And yeah, that'll be like a bad King's Gambit. So yeah, anyway, the next game was also kind of a similar story, where another very talented opponent, but they got themselves into a difficult position out of the opening. So yeah, here again, my opponent's also rated over 2,000, and I was white, we played a Sicilian, so 4c5, and we played one of the main lines of the Sveshnikov. I actually should point out there's a couple different variants of the Sveshnikov, so like this is maybe the more well-known one, where black just plays e5 right away. After knight b5, it usually goes d6. And, I mean, yeah, like typically I guess white plays, I actually forgot how this goes exactly, but it's like knight c3 and then something like that, say 6 here, b5. Okay, something along these lines. Basically, the Sveshnikov, you're sacrificing the d5 square, but you're trying to get good control of the center, and often to win control over d5, white ends up playing bishop g5 and trading off for this knight on f6, which also gives you the two bishops. It's an opening I have actually played myself with black occasionally. So yeah, perfectly playable opening. My opponent here played a much less common move though, a6. And the reason this is not as commonly played is because after knight d6 check now, you kind of still have your positional weaknesses, but now you also have to give away the bishop pair. So instead of a normal Sveshnikov where maybe white ends up giving the bishop pair, and you have at least that to kind of play around with. Now here, white kind of has all the advantages. I have control over, especially d5, this weak point in the center, and I also have the bishop pair now. So yeah, I mean this is a line like there have been some games played after queen e7. I actually had this exact same position against the same opponent in an earlier game, and I think in that game I took on e7, and yeah, I mean even the end game is, I forget what I played here. I think I played knight c3. Yeah, I think I played knight c3. I mean even this end game is still, I think, slightly better for white just because you have two bishops. But actually, yeah, it turns out that there's maybe a stronger move here, which I played, which is queen d1. And it looks very bizarre to just go all the way back with your queen. But actually the point is we want to stay in the middle game, and we want to really try and fight for this d5 square. Like oftentimes black will end up playing knight f6, and we can play bishop g5, and then quickly knight c3, knight d5. And by keeping queens on the board, we actually can have more pressure in the middle game than we might have in the end game. So yeah, so this is what happened, knight f6, knight c3, d6. I think you can also play h6 here, which that would make more sense to me. Like I would play h6 because I don't want to allow bishop g5 and knight d5. But this is actually also like a line, d6. And I was very surprised that this is still theory. Bishop g5, bishop e6, and then I play knight d5. And I thought that this was just a very good position for white. Actually, in the database, white scores like 70% here. And there's, I think there's at least 100 or so games. But yeah, this is not a position that I would ever want to play with black. I mean, I have played Sveshnikovs before, but this just kind of looks like you're giving white two bishops and more space. And, in theory, you're going to have some attack after you move this knight, and you play f5, and you can attack on the king side. But it's kind of going to take you a while to set it up, and we've already traded off two minor pieces, so an attack is not going to be as powerful with only two sets of minor pieces on the board. So, yeah, I mean, white's plan is just going to be to advance on the queen side, and there's not really a whole lot black can do to stop it. So, pretty much that's what happened. Bishop e2, knight b7, I castled, and I played c4. And, I mean, yeah, already, like, it's very easy in this kind of a position to just make a couple natural moves with black, and then end up in serious trouble. Because your position is just a little bit cramped, a little bit passive, and you don't have a great, easy way to stop this plan of just, pushing the pawns, rook c1, bishop e3, and I'm going to play c5 at some point. So he played rook a b8, which makes sense to try and play b5. This is like the one good pawn break that black has. Rook c1. So now if you play b5, I'm just going to take, and this will be bad news. I can play rook c6 or rook c7 just to invade. So he played h6, which makes sense. Bishop e3, rook f c8. But now, okay, now he is maybe getting ready to play b5, because at least the c file is protected. But I just played b4, and now b5 will actually be answered with c5. So this is a very common tactical theme in this kind of a structure, where it looks like actually black has 4 defenders on the c5 square, and I only have 3 defenders. But the tactical idea is if you actually do take this pawn, then this other pawn can go forward. I can play d6. And now to defend the knight, you have to play queen a7. And this position is actually just bad. I mean, I think even if it's black to move here, it's just bad, because you have no way of getting out of this pin, and I can even play some slow move like rook c2, just getting ready for queen c1, and yeah, I don't really see how you're going to get out of this pin. If you play knight d7, I can always play bishop g4, so it's just too much pressure for black. So yeah, I thought he would play b6 in the game just to stop c5, but this is also a pretty passive setup, because now you're already saying I'm not going to play b5, I'm just going to kind of turtle up and see what happens. And I mean, there's different ways that white can play this. I guess you can try to play for f4. I'm not sure if I would have done that. You can kind of fish around like queen a4 just to poke around at some of these weaknesses. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't actually totally sure what my plan would be. I mean, I would like to break through with c5, or maybe a4, a5 as another idea to consider. So yeah, b6 would probably be the way that black should continue to play this game. And then yeah, I mean, white is still clearly better, but it's still, like, white's not winning. But after knight e8, which was played in the game, now I get a chance to play c5. So now, okay, already the opening is turning into a quick disaster for black, because this position already to me looks close to winning. Because you cannot, I mean, you can take this, but you're not going to be able to take a second time because of the same tactic, d6. Then if you take, I'll trade queens and win a piece. And if you can't take on c5, then you're going to have to answer to d6 or c6 next move, which is going to be pretty bad. But on the other hand, if you don't take on c5, I can play c6 anyway, and I'm going to start creating a pretty powerful passed pawn and also undermine your a6 pawn. So I don't really see a good defense here for black, because you can't guard the c6 square again. So he played b5, and now it's kind of a choice. You have to decide between c6 or en passant. I think both are pretty good, but I played cb, and I just want to open up the position for my bishops and get to this a6 pawn. So after knight b6, I played queen c6, and okay, yeah, I mean, now I'm attacking your knight, I'm also attacking a6, so it's difficult to defend everything, actually. I guess you can play queen b7. Trying to remember what I was going to do against that. I think I can just play like rook c1, not sure. Although, yeah, I think I was trying to figure something like this out. If you take, and I take, and I play bishop f3. Actually, this may be playable, because rook b5. Yeah, maybe I don't play rook c1. I'm trying to remember what I was going to do. Yeah, maybe I can just take, and take here. And then just defend my pawn, like rook d1. I mean, either way, the position is going to be bad news for black. Even if we get to an endgame and I don't win a pawn, I still have the 2 bishops on this outside pawn majority. So, okay, so anyway, what happened is queen d7, and now I can just take on a6, and now the rest is just conversion. So he played queen d8, defending his knight. Just play rook c1. And after knight f6, now there's a forcing way to just get a winning endgame for white. Black does have a little bit of counterplay, because my d-pawn is weak. But if we just look at all the forcing moves, all the captures, then you can see I can take on b6 and play queen c8. So black has to respond to this threat. And after you take, I play b5. And there's no defense to a4, a5, which traps the rook. So yeah, knight d5, a4, and the game ended like this here. And it's one last trick. If I take your knight, then I blunder into checkmate. So that would be unfortunate, but of course I just take the rook. So this definitely was something that has been a problem for me. Like when I was around, these kids' age, and by the way, these kids are both higher rated than I was when I was their age. So um, definitely they both have a very bright future. But I also occasionally struggled in the openings, and usually would not get very good positions out of the opening. And even today, like I, often get out of book very early in the opening, even in like a mainline position, and I just kind of innovating from there. Which, it's maybe okay, but you can get into a bad position pretty quickly if you don't have good enough opening knowledge or you just pick a bad line to play out of the opening. So I've learned a lot of lessons that way, the hard way, by losing some tough games against GMs in openings that I probably shouldn't have been playing. So these are definitely valuable lessons to take away. So yeah, I guess we'll stop there. And next week we'll hopefully have another game from the league, and we will probably analyze that. So I will, yeah, see you then. See you next week.